Hudnall show. Coming to you from our studios right here in exciting El Paso, Texas. Gateway to the Old West and the most haunted city in the country. Well, today is May the 15th, 135th day of the year. Just 230 days remain the year's over with. Holidays and observances. National Chocolate Chip Day. Global Accessibility Awareness Day. Join an event, join a webinar, talk about what makes the internet exciting to you. National Notebook Day, throwing flowers to somebody day. National Straw Hat Day, National Nylon Stocking Day, and a National Conscientious Objectors Day. I ran into a few of those when I was in the military. And a National Vascular Birthmarks Awareness Day, National Aperitif Day, HG Awareness Day. HG is hyperemesis gravidorum. It's a pregnancy condition marked by nausea and vomiting. National Senior Fraud Awareness Day, MPS Awareness Day, TSC Global Awareness Day. TSC, of course, is it's a rare genetic condition that causes tumors to grow in organs like the brain, the heart, the kidneys, and even on the skin. Affects each person differently. National Safety Dose Day, and a National Kangaroo Care Awareness Day, and a National Day of Families, Peace Officers Memorial Day, National Stationery Week, American Craft Beer Week, Back to Work Week, National Salt Awareness Week, and the Cannes Film Festival, which goes on until Saturday the 24th. Well, that having been said, let's see what's in the news. President Trump has made some economic agreements in the Middle East. Says America's going to lead the world again. We have the moment of truth coming up. Now, Milwaukee Judge Hannah Dugan, she was arrested for helping an undocumented immigrant flee from ICE in her courtroom. Her legal team has filed a motion to dismiss the charges, claiming she has judicial immunity for anything she does. Remember, when you're one of God's anointed, you can do as you please. Well, Democratic Senator Senator Chris Murphy says it would have helped Democrats if then President Joe Biden hadn't run in 2024. But right up until he stepped down as candidate, everybody was bragging about what a sharp as a tack individual he was. Can you say cover up? No. Supreme Court's getting ready for a legal fight that could affect President Trump's agenda. They're going to hear challenges to his birthright citizenship order in a major case. The decision could dramatically impact lower courts' ability to issue nationwide blocks on presidential policies. When you've got district courts issuing orders that affect the entire country, that's a little silly. Well, archaeologists have unearthed a well-preserved wooden remnant of an ancient Roman town. Belgium's Vizsla River kept a 2nd century pipe intact for almost 2,000 years, which is a whole lot better than the pipes that we have today, let me tell you. Diddy's trials going on. John Cena, WWE legend, is giving dating advice. I don't know what makes him an expert, but he's giving dating advice. Swalwell is well known. He has a BS detector during an exchange about Abrigo Garcia. The Democrats worship this criminal wife beater. They can't seem to understand that beating your wife is really not accepted behavior. Well, the Casanova killer is going to be executed after 30 years after his murder spree. He would go to a bar, chat up a young lady, get her in the car, kill her. He killed several. Let's see, El Chapo's relatives have come to the U.S. in a deal with the Trump administration. Yeah, let's bring all the criminals we can find here. Well, experts are saying that King Charles's reign is being damaged by Prince Harry and his tell-all. The Supreme Court is finally going to weigh in regarding some of these decisions by God's anointed. And you got somebody who today is a moron, gets elected or appointed a judge, and suddenly becomes the most brilliant person in the room. I have difficulty with that, having dealt with quite a number of judges. I know one that if he said something, I'd believe him. The rest of them I'd have to go check. Well, CBS correspondent has slammed the Pulitzer Prize board. Wall Street Journal did a 2024 report on Biden's decline. And it was downplayed, of course, by every other media source in the country, because they kept swearing he was sharp as a tack and there was no problem with him. And when push came to shove, a lot of problems popped up. Well, housing has become more affordable for middle-class earners, but supply issues have become a major issue. Well, let's see. President Biden's pandemic playbook failed. President Trump has come up with a different way of addressing issues. All right, we've been talking about mysterious disappearances and things like that. And there have been quite a number of reports from various people about strange things in the sky. We've got one report that was written up in Man's Illustrated magazine about something seen in the Antarctic Ocean. In an article called UFOs at 450 Fathoms, author Ed Hyde talked about Dr. R.J. Villea, a Brazilian scientist who was with the U.S. Navy during Operation Deep Freeze at the South Pole. Well, something came out of the sea and smashed through 40 feet of ice. It's silver-colored, soared up, and flashed off into the polar sky. It knocked chunks of ice high into the air. Well, what they think Dr. Villea may have seen was a underwater UFO. Since the first sighting of flying saucers by Kenneth Arnold over Mount Rainier in Washington, June 24th, 1947, more than 50% of all UFO sightings have been connected with water. A lot of UFO researchers believe that the intelligence has established secret underwater UFO bases on this planet. These researchers all claim a superior race of alien beings have monitored our civilization for thousands of years. Dr. Ivan T. Sanderson, who's written several books on UFOs, suggested in a book called Invisible Residents that just such an underwater civilization has existed on this planet for centuries. He explained that this hidden race of beings may possibly have evolved on this planet. They may not be from outer space. They may be from what you might call inner space. They also considered a possibility they are intelligent entities from another world who've been coming here for a long time, kind of like their vacation spot. One theory about them is that they have bases underneath what we call the Triangle of the Lost. In 1963, the U.S. Navy sent several ships to patrol off the coast of Puerto Rico. Among these vessels was the flagship, the USS Wasp, an aircraft carrier. It was the command ship for something called Operation Detect, to test and train U.S. Navy personnel in underwater sonar tracking operations. Remember, submarines also took place in that exercise to provide an object to be tracked. The Navy hoped to train advanced sonar crewmen in the use of extremely intricate and highly advanced electronic tracking systems. In addition to the ships and submarines, there were a number of airplanes that took part in the operation. They were equipped with top-secret sonar tracking devices, allowing them to fly over the ocean and detect underwater movement of those submarines. Exercise went just fine until a sonar operator demanded that the commander of the Wasp come to the sonar shop. Equipment's gone haywire. And the captain, rather than go down, said, "We'll get a technician to fix it." So we've tried that. Nothing works. Getting a readout on an object that just can't be correct. Well, while that report was being made, a number of other reports came into the Wasp command post on similar problems on 14 other ships. So the officer in question rushed to the Wasp sonar room, discovered operators had picked up an underwater object that was apparently driven by a single propeller. The object was moving beneath the waves at a speed of more than 150 knots. Well, the officer said, "That's impossible. Nothing goes that fast. I've been around submarines, and they can't move that fast at all." Fastest speed a submarine makes underwater is about 45 knots, or about 51.8 miles per hour. But this sophisticated U.S. Navy tracking equipment indicated something was moving at an incredible speed beneath the Triangle of the Lost. And for the next 2 days, Navy technicians prepared an accurate record of the object maneuvering beneath the ocean. At one point, that object submerged to a depth of more than 27,000 feet, and that, of course, is impossible for a standard submarine. The U.S. Elemental made a dive off the Bahama Islands November 12, 1957, to a record-breaking 6,250 feet. And the Tristy, a specially equipped diving craft, went to 35,800 feet in the Pacific Ocean in 1960. But even assuming something like the Tristy was out there, it couldn't move at 150 knots. Well, Navy Command Headquarters at Norfolk, Virginia was notified of what had been detected. Admirals conferred quickly and immediately radioed back, no nation in the world has a submarine capable of such high-speed maneuvers. Navy Command suggested that the detection and tracking equipment on board should be carefully checked for the possibility of malfunction. Now, one sonar recording machine might give out a mistaken reading, but the equipment on board 14 ships, the fact that it might malfunction at the same time was almost impossible. Well, the object they were tracking eventually vanished in the direction of the Azores Islands, and brass demanded and then filed away reports on the incident. Nobody could account for whatever that object was. Tests indicated its sonar equipment was functioning perfectly. 3 years later, in 1956, Navy scientists began to experiment with long-range underwater communication systems. They were well aware of the problems of communicating over long distances underwater. A number of attempts were made to establish a foolproof system, but unfortunately all attempts failed. So one scientist came up with a new approach to the problem. He set up a mile-long antenna to prove his point. The antenna was laid along the continental shelf, which stretches out 100 miles from the east coast of the U.S. before dropping into the deepest parts of the Atlantic. And far out to sea was a research ship with instruments lowered close to the bottom to pick up signals, and transmissions of signals got underway. What startled the men on board the research ship was the reception of a signal and then a repeat of that signal, followed by a strange code that the computers still haven't broken to this day. Well, according to the report, what may have occurred, according to the subsequent naval reports, was that some signal, in some manner, the signals were picked up and mimicked by something unknown. And then this unknown intelligence decided to begin transmitting its own messages on the same wavelength used by the Navy. According to the report, the scientists tracked the source of these strange signals to the deepest part of the Atlantic Ocean, about 29,000 feet. Well, the U.S. Navy is not the only organization that encountered trouble in the Triangle of the Lost. Night of July 6, 1955, the TT Jawinta sailed through the Triangle. This was a Norwegian ship en route between Venezuela and the Canary Islands. Sunday, the lookout reported a bright object moving in a northerly direction across the sky. Captain H.A. Trovick was alerted and he rushed to the bridge. Later wrote a report that was submitted to the Geophysical Institute in Bergen, Norway. In that report, Chief Mate Triamng stated, "I can say with absolute certainty this was not an aircraft of any known design, and neither was it a rocket, a meteor, or a ball of lightning." Well, a number of crewmen described the object as moving at a tremendous rate of speed. Said long tongues of flame coming out behind it. One crewman added the object was visible for about 1 minute. It moved across the sky during that time. Despite this enormous speed and the closeness of its passage over the ship, nobody heard anything. One seaman, Hernandez Ambrosios, has said it appeared as though the object had come out of the sea. Well, there have been a lot of reports of this matter coming out of the Triangle of the Lost for many years. In 1887, the JPA was captained by C.D. Sweet out of Jamaica when, during a fierce storm, two objects were sighted in the air above the ship, one luminous and the other one dark. They fell into the sea with a loud noise. The report comes out of the Monthly Weather Review dated 1897. Another sighting took place in 1892 when the Panamanian ship the Green, sailing on a calm night on a westerly course off the island of Jamaica. Captain Jonathan Wentworth reported in his journal that two large glowing objects rose up out of the sea beside the ship. He said the objects are so brilliant that the deck of the ship was brighter than I'd ever seen them. He explained that these two objects followed alongside the ship for about 5 minutes, and a number of the crew members were terrified. He said, "No logical explanation for this. I've seen ball lightning and definitely was not in that category. The glowing balls were about the size of a small house. They followed alongside and stayed at a distance of about 200 yards on each side. For what seemed like an eternity, the intensity of the fiery substances seemed to lessen and dropped toward the surface of the ocean as they dimmed, and both the crew members and the captain were grateful when they slipped beneath the waves." Well, a writing called A Diary of Andrew Bloxham was published in 1925 in Honolulu by the Bernice T. Bishop Museum. There was an entry in the book that talks about a similar light being sighted at 3 o'clock in the morning, August 12, 1825, when Seaman Bloxham was on a voyage. According to what he wrote, about 3:30 o'clock, the middle watch on the deck was astonished to find everything around them suddenly illuminated. They looked to the eastward and beheld a large, round, luminous body rising up about 7 degrees from the water to the clouds, and falling again out of sight, and then a second time coming up and falling. It was a color of a red-hot cannonball, appeared about the size of the sun. It gave so great a light that the pen could have been picked up on the deck. In the March 1955 issue of Fate magazine, there was a report on the Group Beer, a Dutch ship. Crew mementos told a strange story, seeing a flat disc-like object come out of the ocean. The captain of the vessel was named Jan Boshoff and was called to the deck as soon as the object was sighted. And he observed this flat object through his binoculars, and he said it was grayish in color and turned lighter around the edges as it moved about. Cornelius Cooey, a third officer aboard the Group Beer, said the object moved toward the southwest with the setting sun. He measured the object with his sextant at 8:15 p.m. and he said the object was traveling at an extremely high rate of speed. December 13th, 1956, a Swedish freighter contacted the harbor master at La Guerra, Venezuela, and said that cone-shaped devices or objects were falling vertically into the ocean off the coast. The devices are quite bright and giving off a strange luminous glare. Whenever the object hits the water, they hear explosions, and the sea becomes brightly colored where they've dropped. Captain also announced the sea became extremely agitated with a bubbling, boiling motion when the cone-shaped objects disappeared beneath the waves. And this was chalked up to another example of unexplained phenomenon, the Triangle Lost. A number of years ago, private detective Renfro Hayes of Memphis, Tennessee, and another individual did an extensive investigation into the James Earl Ray case. Now, Hayes was a top investigator at the time who was working for the defense attorneys on Ray's case. If you remember, James Earl Ray is the man who's supposed to have shot Martin Luther King. During the investigation, I encountered a lot of folks with strange, even unusual backgrounds. Both Renfro Hayes and the other investigators are convinced that Ray was a pawn in a well-planned paramilitary operation to assassinate Dr. King. Through the investigation, they came acquainted with a Cuban soldier of fortune known as Raymond Fernandez. This 34-year-old refugee from Cuba had originally fought with Castro's forces and driving the Batista government off the island. And he said Castro would never have gone communistic for the stupidity of the American State Department. When he took the island, he started executing the monsters who had suppressed the Cuban people for so many years, and this is a tradition in Latin America. You don't leave the losers alive to foment trouble in your regime, and part of the State Department became upset with these executions, put pressure on Castro, and his only alternative, of course, was to seek aid from the Russians. Well, Fernandez became disenchanted with the communist interference in the revolution, and with the aid of a boat stolen from a small Cuban port, he left the island and came to Miami as a refugee. He said, "We didn't need the Russians to tell us how to run the country." Well, he was one of the soldiers of fortune who were financed and trained by the CIA to make raids on Castro's Cuban facilities, and then a regular shuttle route in and out of Cuba in those days. CIA was gearing up for the Bay of Pigs invasion, and Fernandez said he'd make a night run to Cuba with a load of guns or explosive for the rebel forces recruited by the CIA, and on the return trip he'd bring out refugees who wanted to come to the U.S. But during one trip into the communist waters, Fernandez was the leader of a three-man expedition manning a swift, high-powered Chris Craft cruiser. Engines had been modified, and they could really make excellent time, and that night they were running slow because it was essential that the cargo radio transmission equipment reach a rebel leader in Cuba. Now, the voyage to Cuba was uneventful, he said. The equipment was landed on a small, secluded beach in a well-protected cove, and they were pulling out to head back to the U.S. when they were called back to shore, and the rebels told them a fleet of Cuban patrol boats were spotted a few miles down the coast. So they took off fast, hoping to outrun the cruisers. It was a deadly cat-and-mouse game, triggered when a Cuban patrol boat used radar to lock onto the CIA cruiser. Fernandez said they tried everything to shake him, but nothing seemed to work, and the Cubans were gaining on him, and it was only a question of time till they were either captured or sunk. Well, they were deep in the Triangle Lost at that time. Fernandez was piloting the boat and keeping an eye on the pursuers, and he said this part of the story sounds like science fiction. He's looking back at the Cuban patrol boat, trying to gauge when they get close enough for a shot, and suddenly he saw a light to the port side. He looked in that direction and saw the light was beneath the surface. Now, his attention was drawn to the light, which was getting brighter with each passing second. Went from the intensity of a light bulb to the brilliance of the brightest light he'd ever seen within a span of about 20 seconds. Might have been less than that. You never sure of time when you're in the middle of a critical situation. And two other Cubans on the boat, piloted by Fernandez, also saw the light, and none of them knew what it was. Three men watched as the light suddenly moved between the escaping cruiser and the Cuban patrol boat, and the waters of the relatively calm ocean began to bubble and boil. Communist Cuban patrol boat swerved to avoid the turbulent waters, and Fernandez slowed down. Cuban boat also stopped. In seconds, Fernandez was shocked to see a silver-colored disc-shaped object rise up out of the water. The ascent was extremely rapid. The Cuban adventurer said it was enough to make him stop drinking. The device was exactly like reports he read about flying saucers. It was a large disc about 40 feet in diameter. Outer edges of the UFO were glowing bright red and blue when the device came plunging up out of the water. And it was accompanied by two other small objects that popped up out of the water right behind it. Well, according to Fernandez, the circular disc rose to a height of about 50 to 75 feet above the surface, and the smaller disc hovered about 20 or 30 feet below the larger disc. Two miniature discs were about 50 inches in diameter, and they separated almost immediately when they came up out of the sea. Little units then moved toward his boat and the Cuban patrol boat. By then, both boats, the communist boat and his own, were having engine trouble. Tried the ignition switch, but there was a complete lack of power. Could hear the patrol boat crew shouting at each other about their engines stopping. After their power loss occurred, a large beam of white light poured down from a very large disc hovering overhead. Said it wasn't anything unusual about that light. It was as if somebody turned on a powerful searchlight that illuminated the entire area. Somebody had snapped a switch, turning the night into the brilliance of high noon. Well, Fernandez kept trying to get his engine started and fought with Castro and announced to Cuba from the start of the revolution he was known as a professional soldier with a calm reaction to any emergency situation. But he admitted he was pretty shaky. One of his crew was a kid named Juan Garcia, about 22. This was his first trip. He became agitated and excited, started shouting something about Judgment Day and the end of the world. Then he fell to the deck of the cruiser and started praying. Fortunately, Fernandez's other crewman was an experienced fighter, and he said he was having trouble getting the engine started. He checked everything out, and at that point, the smaller disc was right above their boat. Well, the small disc-like object hovered above the boat and started to blink on and off, and something like orange and blue and green and white. The lights changed color every half second, and this continued for about 30 seconds. And then the disc took on the reddish glow, and that's when they felt the heat. Well, the temperature rose suddenly under the heat of some unknown source, and Fernandez said he began to sweat. This heat was accompanied by a very uncomfortable prickly feeling all over his body, and he felt nauseous. Juan actually became sick enough to vomit over the side of the boat. And across the way, they could see that the Cuban patrol boat was also having issues. Men were crying out, running around the boat in a hysterical manner. Were feeling the same increase in temperature, apparently. Strangely enough, according to Fernandez, the metal and other objects on board his boat didn't heat up even though they were feeling this intense heat. He said, my hand brushed against the barrel of a small lightweight machine gun I always carried, and the metal was actually cool to the touch, but his body and the area around the boat was extremely warm. Well, Fernandez maintained his presence of mind and continued to try and start his engine, and suddenly the small disc above him moved away toward the larger device, and at that point his engine started up. The man who'd checked out for a malfunction screamed with pain, and one of the belts on the engine grabbed his finger, carrying his hand around the shaft. He almost lost that hand, and unfortunately did lose some chunks of skin around 2 fingers. Well, with his engines running, Fernandez slammed the throttle to full speed and raced away from the scene. He said, I wanted to get out of there as fast as I could. You see a lot of strange things in the war, but that was the wildest experience he ever had. As he moved back toward Florida, he saw the second small disc move away from the Cuban patrol boat, and brilliant light dimmed. The only light came from the stars and the moon. And you could tell the Cubans got their engines running, and they turned around and headed back for Cuba. They didn't want to take any chances, apparently. Fernandez reported his young companion gradually gained his composure during the voyage back to Florida, and said Juan was really out of it. Very bad experience for the young man. I mean, this was his first trip in and out of Cuba, and it was a tough run with plenty of danger. Okay, if something like that happened, caused him to go into temporary shock. On their return to Florida, Fernandez, Juan Garcia, and the third member of the crew were debriefed extensively by the CIA. He said, I kept insisting this was some sort of secret weapon built and operated by the U.S. We were in danger of being captured or killed when the saucer came pumping up out of the ocean, and the CIA agent who debriefed him refused to say anything. But he did keep going over the story and asking if he'd been drinking. In the afternoon, he was asked to repeat his story to a new man, probably from another part of the company, which is what they call the CIA. He interrogated each of the crew members separately for several hours, extremely interested in the trouble he had with his engines. But he never gave any indication this might be a secret weapon used by the U.S. Well, there was another strange occurrence related to the third man's injured hand. 24 hours after they left Cuba, his hand was completely healed. It was a miracle. I never seen anything heal that rapidly. The agent who directed him heard about this. This guy was flown off somewhere for medical tests. That was Gomez. Fernandez said he never saw him again. Never did know his first name. Gomez might have been the name he was using instead of his real one. Well, Fernandez and the second man, Juan, remained in the CIA encampment. Juan seemed to be the one who was troubled the most by the experience. He had trouble coping with things on the boat. On the way back, he complained of a severe headache. By noon of the next day, he had broken out in a horrible red rash, as if he had hives from eating too many strawberries or something like that. His temperature hit 102 degrees. He was put in sick bay for observation, and after a few hours, the rash disappeared. Like everything else in life, the story told by Raymond Fernandez could be true, could be false. There's no reason for him to make up such a crazy story. He wasn't personally involved in the assassination of Dr. King, wasn't a suspect in the case. He was encountered by accident during the investigation into James Earl Ray. Fernandez, when asked if he had heard of other experiences like this, said I had read about something like this happening a few nights before the invasion of the Bay of Pigs. Man was accidentally lost overboard during a running gun battle with a Cuban patrol boat. Now, there were patrol boats all over the place, according to the story, and the leader of the group made one run back to try and find the man, but decided it was too dark to save him. The boat turned back toward Florida when a greenish light fog materialized behind them. Made a quick turn back into the fog and found the man in the water, enveloped by this mysterious vapor. He said there were all sorts of rumors floating around camp just before the invasion. Somebody could have made this up as an interesting story to tell his friends. Well, Fernandez asked, did he hear anything more about the CIA investigation of the incident? And he replied, only they were interested in the report. Right after that, the orders went out to inform your agent in charge of anything unusual that happened during a run to Cuba. Naturally, they were always debriefed after a trip. They found it odd they would make a special request like that. They discussed it among themselves and decided some people might have had an incident like his happen, but didn't report it for fear of being ridiculed. Now, Fernandez was asked if he had any interest in flying saucers or UFOs prior to that, and he said absolutely not. I thought they was something that might be around, but I hadn't seen one, so never gave me any thought. I'm interested in the revolution and freeing Cuba from Batista's rule. So I operated underground and Castro took to the mountains and didn't have much time to think of anything other than avoiding Batista's secret police and a firing squad. Well, after the Bay of Pigs, Fernandez said everything. He settled down. He took time to read everything on flying saucers, the Bermuda Triangle, and the facets of the mystery. He said, I think that flying saucer came out of the sea, accompanied by two smaller discs or surveillance units. Why they came up at that point in time, I don't know. The phenomena continued in a similar vein. There were reports of UFOs being accompanied by bright lights that beamed down. They often produce heat and high temperatures, and the uncomfortable prickly feeling they experienced was also associated with the flying saucer contacts. And according to Fernandez, the big disc appeared solid, silver and grayish colored metal. Nothing you could see after the searchlight was turned on. It looked like a big light bulb. There was no lost time. The only change in his life was he quit soldiering and fighting wars. He thought he was lucky to get out of the Bay of Pigs alive. So he decided to find excitement some other way, and he decided after the invasion it really didn't matter who ran Cuba. One regime would be about as bad as the other. Juan had some issues after that. He did find out from his handler that there was a section of the CIA devoted to checking out UFO reports, not only in the Bay of Pigs, but all over the world. He said they have a big computer where these reports are filed. They also translate foreign reports. The idea is try to find a pattern in the sightings. But unfortunately, they never did find a pattern. There's long been legends about a mysterious city existing on the ocean floor. During the investigation into James Earl Ray, the private detective and his associate came in contact with another man by the name of Juan Garcia. He had an interesting story to tell. There are, according to Garcia, CIA wanted to fly him to Washington and check him into the Naval Hospital at Bethesda and examine him after he had his contact with UFOs. So the day after that happened, he got a rash, his temperature rose. Now sounds like the same guy that was with Fernandez. Doctors couldn't find any reason for either the rash or the fever. Garcia said, in spite of the invitation, he didn't accept it. He wanted to be involved in the invasion of the Bay of Pigs. Didn't want to be a guinea pig in a hospital. Well, he left behind because everybody thought he was too nervous, and he explained his headaches from mind splitting and became with tremendous pain. Only thing he could do was close his eyes, lay down in a dark room, and pray. Nothing helped except that. He even tried codeine pills. They didn't work. Whenever he laid down, he'd drift off to sleep, and that's when he'd get the same dream. Always the same dream, while watching a movie over and over. He read a bit later about UFO contactees and their experiences, and a lot of them had headaches after being around a UFO. Rash can develop when they've been too close. Garcia said his rash was all over his body. He went on to tell details about his dream. The dream opened up with a picture of the CIA cruiser pulling away from the UFO in the Triangle of the Lost. Garcia, in his dream, saw himself in the exact position he'd occupied on the deck, kneeling at the side of the boat, his eyes closed, because he had gotten sick and thrown up. Dreams then focused on a large hovering UFO. The craft hung above the scene momentarily, then a hatch opened and two smaller discs entered the larger craft. The hatch closed with a sliding motion, and a large disc dropped slowly to the surface, and it hit the water and drifted slowly toward the bottom. Well, the terrifying part of this, according to Garcia, is he believed the dream was a picture of what really happened. As the UFO neared the bottom, it straightened out and traveled just above the bottom of the ocean for quite some time, slowed down and approached what looked like a mountain on the sea floor. And then part of the mountain opened up and the UFO went into a tunnel. In the dream, he followed the UFO right into the middle of this undersea mountain. Turns out the mountain was actually a camouflaged undersea UFO base. And inside it was an entire city. Not a city like we routinely expect, but more like a well-run military installation. Flying saucer came out of the tunnel into a large room, sort of like an aircraft hangar. Several other dish-shaped objects there, and they varied in size from the small, which appeared to be surveillance craft, to the large oval disc that had come out of the sea. And inside the hangar, a couple of people working on the saucers wore overalls, didn't appear to have any zippers or buttons or belts. Garcia explained his dream focused on the storage area for several minutes. Of course, in a dream, you don't really have a concept of time. The big disc hovered over a platform for a second, and some legs shot out. It seemed like the craft sort of rested on this concrete-like platform. Then a hatch opened up, and two men came out. They were short, and they had thin bodies, and their faces were slightly different than a normal human. Not enough to be noticed. Could have been light in the hangar, but they seemed to have an Oriental Indian color to their skin. They left the ship and walked over to the mechanics, and there was a discussion about something or other. But Garcia said he couldn't hear what the discussion was about. Then these two UFO pilots left the hangar and entered another part of the undersea facility. There was a long corridor, according to Garcia, and it led to another room, and like a mission control center with computers and a lot of unusual machines. He called it a debriefing room. He said they didn't debrief verbally. They took off their helmets, put a gadget over their heads, and the gadget had electrodes that appeared to spark a little when they struck their foreheads, but they didn't show any pain. And they kept the gadgets on their heads for about a minute or so, and then the computers started up, and it appeared they were mentally debriefed. That'd be an incredible device. An agent or soldier would be able to withhold information about an operation. The computer would just go into his mind and pull everything out. Well, according to Garcia, the two UFO individuals left the room, and he said he followed a man with a long pair of white coveralls down the corridor. He didn't look like the other people. Looked like an average American or Englishman. The only difference was he looked a little bit too precisely like a soldier. And in a room that looked something like a lounge where people gathered to talk and drink coffee and socialize. There were several people there, both men and women. A couple of folks had very long hair, and all these coveralls, although they were different colors, seemed to get along with each other on an equal basis. He had the feeling some of these people were originally there, and some were prisoners or captives from the surface. Naturally, he couldn't swear to this, but it was kind of a feeling. He intuitively knew all this. He said in his dream about the undersea city, he said he was envisioning the installation when the horn started blowing. Like the emergency horn in a military operation, indicate that everybody should assume their prearranged battle stations. Garcia said he was about to gain some more information, but everybody started running toward the hangar. That's when the dream ended. He tried everything, including meditation, but he can't add anything else to the dream. He said he knew it sounded crazy, and maybe he ought to just forget it and go home, but maybe he's just crazy. But he thinks the dream was put into his mind when they were on the ocean. I mean, he didn't have any evidence that would stand up in a court of law. Well, after the use of hypnotism on the Nebraska patrolman who had contact with UFOs, Garcia began to utilize self-hypnosis. That experience triggered his interest in the subject. Over the next few months, he studied this often online subject, worked with a professor at the University of Iowa on the hypnotic experiments, became a fairly decent hypnotist himself. And Garcia was asked would he agree to be hypnotized, and eventually he agreed. And after 2 false tries, they got him into a light trance and utilized the hypnotic override with Garcia's fingers, suggesting if he lied, his middle finger on his left hand would rise up and begin to tap his knee. Well, with the Cuban in a trance, they questioned Garcia about his dream. They asked me if he had the dream more than once. He said yes, and he said, when did it start? Right after they went to Cuba that night. Was it a dream? Just a dream? And he said no. He said this is a message from the flying saucer people. Did they put the dream into your subconscious mind? And he said yes. He was asked why they would do that. He said he wanted to show us they were friendly to us. They're our friends, never intend to harm us. And Garcia was asked how he knew that, and he said they told me through my mind. He said, was asked, are they from another planet? And he said some of them are. And he said he was asked where the rest are from, and he said they're like us. Well, they also told Garcia they'd been in our world for a very long time. The old order's going away, and a new race is developing. Well, gradually they drew out an incredible story of the selection of mothers to bear children that would be part of the alien intelligence, part human. Agents of the UFO intelligence moved through the surface world starting about 1929. And certain women, he was told, were carefully selected for their health and genes and strength, which could account for some of the unexplained disappearances that have taken place. Well, after these children were born, starting in 1929, they were watched carefully by the UFO intelligence. And They were allowed to live as if they were normal Homo sapiens. They were actually the protected ones. Allowed to have the usual trials and tribulations of a normal life, but they were protected by the UFO group. Well, when asked how this protection is given, he said through the gift of advanced intuition. Fatal accidents, deadly situations that threaten their lives were guarded against by the original ones, and kind of a field of energy, so to speak. Well, it's interesting to note there could well be underground cities. Underwater cities that were actually underground on the bottom of the ocean. And certainly, there'd be no way we could determine the hypnotic process. You don't know if it gets true information or if it's taps into dreams. But certainly it's something to consider. Now, some of the other information that came out of Juan Garcia's dream about the undersea city included the vision of a race of giants that inhabited the area. These creatures allegedly guard the portals of the facility. Now, there have been reports of behemoth beings in and around the Triangle that lost for centuries. Early mariners in the Triangle reported sightings of these creatures both on land and sea, and there are even current reports of giants inhabiting the jungles of Central and South America. Now, giants may be living in the boondocks and South American jungles, if we believe the reports that come out of the London Daily Mirror. There was a dispatch from Rio de Janeiro in 1966 that told of a civilized tribe of the Kayapo nation of the natives being harassed by a band of marauding giants. A number of hunters and Indian villagers have been killed by these creatures. A group of Brazilian Air Force cadets went their survival training mission in the jungle, and they heard about the giants. They tried unsuccessfully to make contact with these 7.5-foot tall entities who prowl the single region of Mato Grosso. They captured a young boy during a skirmish with the giants, according to the chief of the peaceful Caliparazo Kayapo tribe. Grew to be almost 8 feet tall. He became so huge and strong he frightened the villagers, and he became rebellious. He was sentenced to death and executed. Well, traditions affirming the existence of giants can be found all over South America and in Mexico. In the books of one of the Aztec kings, it said there's general agreement that the giant Canames were the first inhabitants of the country. They were horrible monsters, had the habits of ugly vices. They terrorized all the people. They were killed by the angry gods, according to the writings of the Aztec king. All nature trembled, the seas rose up, and the mountains became volcanoes. Well, another version of that story can be found in the Saxo Grammaticus. Ages ago, there existed 3 types of men. Those of great stature and immense height, they were called the giants. Those of high spirit had the ability to predict. They had the art of prophecy. And then there was ordinary man. Common man lost the arts of the earlier races, the power to change the body and deceive the eyes of men, but they conquered the older races and exterminated the giants. Now, when I was in South America, I thought the stories I was told about giants back in the jungles were just pipe dreams. But maybe they were telling me the truth. But when the gold-hungry Spanish conquistadors waded through the surf and onto the shores of the New World, they were greeted with stories from the natives about a race of giants who plundered the villages and raped captive women to death and ambushed men and small children for their cannibal's feast. And these legends will continue to this day as part of the Incan folk tradition. A number are preserved in the writings of Incan Grandioso de la Vega, a native adventurer, a fiery Incan patriot, a young man who led the bloody rebellion against the Spanish invaders, a rebel who escaped death from the Spaniards' Toledo steel swords. He was also a notable scholar who appreciated good books, rare wines, fine art, and shapely women. Well, a new planned night raid against the Spanish outposts was the start of his adventures. Garcilaso and his native rebels were overwhelmed by the Spaniards and were thrown into a prison stockade to await judgment from a tribunal of conquistadors and priests. Well, he duped a sleepy-eyed guard and engineered the escape of his followers, and trying to be certain all his men had reached safety, he was nabbed by a detachment of soldiers and dragged before his sour-faced tribunal. The captain of the conquistadors said, "I pay respect to your fighting ability, and if all of your people were such furious fighters, we'd have been driven back into the sea." And then one priest said, "Why did you fight us? We bring you the true word of God." And he said, "It's not my God." The captain of the conquistadors asked the tribunal, "Shall we torture him to death?" And the priest said, "Well, look at his body. Notice the sullen look on his face. He's a real prize. We have to follow orders and send a specimen of these people to the king in Seville. His Majesty wants an Incan at his court. This man's intelligent, quick-witted. He'd be a marvelous present." And so the captain asked him if he wanted to go to Spain, and he said, "Well, it's better than death." When he got to Spain, he was given a Spanish name, and despite his primitive background, he acquired a knowledge of the Spanish language. And a Jesuit priest taught Latin to the captive, and he skimmed through the elementary manuscripts and accepted the church to obtain an advanced education. Well, he turned out to be a monumental scholar. He wrote the formidable Comentarios Rosadi de los Incas, a 5-volume history of his people. And the book contained an honest description of the religion and rituals of the Incas. Patriotism and sorrow for his people still burned in his mind, and he included passages in his books condemning the brutality of the Spanish conquerors. 1602, the Spanish king and the church consigned the books to the bonfire, and every available copy was collected and burned. Well, until 1942, when the books were reprinted by a Brazilian publisher, they'd only been available to scholars. Chapter 9, Book 9, Volume 2. One section's headline, "The Giants Who Were in the Manta region in Their Death." Well, according to what was written, on the northern coast of Peru and the Manta region, there lived people who worshipped a huge emerald. This fiery, glistening gem was larger than an ostrich egg. It was placed on a sacred altar, and the people of that region brought many other emeralds and precious stones as gifts to their goddess of the green gem. And a number of years ago, this land was invaded by an army of giants who arrived there from the sea. It was strange to behold. Their eyes were very large, their hair was long and long, they were beardless, and their skin was light. And a few of the giants even wore animal skins for clothing. Others walked the land without clothes, as they hadn't brought any women with them. They built a settlement near the sea at a spot on the desert land of the Manta region. Water scarce there, so they dug enormous wells that were slashed deep into the earth to obtain cool, sweet water. They lined the wells with the rocks, and they were built to last for centuries. Well, they were unable to kill enough giant game to feed their enormous appetite, so they started to raid the native villages in that land. They were almost 20 feet tall, and their raids on the villages struck terror in the hearts of every man. Men and children who were captured or killed were taken to the giant's village, or they became part of a cannibal feast. Women were carried back to the giant settlement where they were attacked, and most of the women ruptured from this abuse and none survived the terrible ordeal. In a few years, the giants were without women and became degenerates. They committed a lot of unnatural acts for their self-gratification. Their actions were an abomination to everybody. And according to what was written, one afternoon, an angel appeared in the skies over the village of the giants and attacked them with a flaming sword. Only a few of these giant men escaped the fury, and many were consumed in the fire. After the angel departed, there were only a few bones to show the giants had ever existed. Well, the legend has all the elements of a sensational science fiction movie. A primitive cult of emerald worshippers, bands of demonic giants who raid native villages, and flaming retribution from the skies. Now, it's possible the angel was a spaceman from another world or dimension, and maybe he witnessed the terrible deeds of the giants and decided to eliminate their race. And you have to ask yourself, did a band of benevolent giants survive to build a secret city beneath the Triangle of the Lost? Well, if Garcilaso's giants did exist, then there should be records in the Spanish archives talking about their reality. Conquistadors looted the land and shipped galleons of gold to a greedy king in Spain, and they also searched for curiosities, oddities, and unusual specimens of life that might amuse the man on the throne. And of course, giant bones would have been a natural gift for the king and his court. Well, when you look at the records maintained by Bernal Diaz de Castillo, you find that Captain Cortez did ship the thigh bone of a giant to the monarch. The natives reported that their ancestors told of giants with huge bones that lived there in past times. Because the giants were evil people with bad habits and were killed off. So, in order to see how tall the giants were, the natives brought in a leg bone of one, very thick and the height of an ordinary man, that would reach only from the hip to the knee. They were amazed at seeing these bones and felt certain there had to have been giants in that country. Captain Cortez said this might be well to send the bone to Castile so that His Majesty could see it. So they sent it with one of the first agents who returned to Spain. Now, I would point out there are stories that come out of the Midwest United States talking about giants who were tall enough that from the knee to the foot was as tall as an ordinary man. Well, on that note, we come to the end of today's show. We'll be back tomorrow and talk more about mysterious disappearances and giants and everything else you can imagine. Until then, this is Ken Hudnall for the Ken Hudnall Show saying have a truly great evening.